Well, if you are into pop culture and or you are a certain age, you probably know that Pretty in Pink is celebrating its 40th anniversary right now. Some of you can't believe that, I guess, because of how quickly time goes. But it's a favorite film of my wife's, and so we went to see it yesterday on the big screen. I've never seen the whole thing before. Because she loves it and watches it with some frequency, I've seen snippets of it, but was never able to quite stitch it all together, and so now I'm a fan, so in 40 years I'll watch it again. Whenever I see a film that's that old, I wonder about the cast members and whether or not they're still alive or still acting. And only one of the main actors from that film died, and he died about 10 years ago. Of course, he was the dad in the movie, so he was older. But Molly Ringwald and John Cryer and Andrew McCarthy and Annie Potts and James Spader are all very active still in film and television. The other day, someone sent me a photograph of some other 1990s young adult TV stars who were not together on a show, but because it was AI generated, they were all there together as if they were inhabiting the same space at the same time. It was James Van Der Beek, who just died this week, Shannon Doherty and Luke Perry and Matthew Perry. If any of those names mean anything to you, you realize they weren't all in the same show together. But more and more, I'm seeing these incredible AI images, and maybe you are too, of people that were not together at the same time in the same space, but somehow someone has brought them together with maybe something that seems to weave them together, or something that calls to us to notice how it is that they could have been connected one to another. And if you ever look at any of these things on social media, you're suddenly flooded with many other things that are very similar to them. And so I've been caught up with some of these old TV shows that you see what they look like when the show was happening, and then you see sitting on a bench or on a chair right next to them what they look like in the present moment. And if they are no longer physically with us, the person that comes in to sit next to that character from the show has angel wings on, so that you know that they are no longer alive, and they show that person at the age they were when they died. And so it helps you kind of get a sense of the passing of time, but also allows you to recognize that everything really is happening at the same time, that we're kind of stuck in this idea of linear time, but that the Holy and the Spirit just weaves us together and kind of cycles back and cycles through. And it's not really that steady or organized. It kind of all comes to us as it does in its own way and its own fashion. I remember when you used to have to just imagine seeing people from different time periods together. Maybe you've been asked this question over the years: who would you like to sit down and have dinner with? Or who would you love to be a fly on the wall, a couple of people having a conversation that didn't inhabit the same time or space, but you know something connected them, and so you wonder what it would be like if those two or that small group got together to have that conversation. Some of you have been out to St. Louis Airport, Lambert Airport, in the Terminal 1, where you see that huge mural. And it is from 1990 also. We're down memory lane a little bit today. And what happens in that mural is that there are Black Americans in flight. So it was created in 1990, but from 1917 forward, they gathered some faces of people in the African American community who had some achievements in aviation. And so I like to imagine when I see those people from different times and places together, what an incredible conversation they would have with one another, because they would be in awe of the advances, and they would be in awe of what it was that sparked some idea or some creativity or some patience and perseverance when someone in the past figured something out or had a new way of seeing something, maybe from underneath or from behind or from a way that no one had ever looked at it before. So that brings us to this morning's meditation. where we said, dream like Martin, lead like Harriet, fight like Malcolm, write like Maya, speak like Frederick, dare like Shirley, think like Garvey, reclaim like Maxine, educate like W.E.B., challenge like Rosa, inspire like Barack. All of those people were not in one place, in one space at one time, but we kind of grouped them together because they were able to be themselves. They were able to open up their hearts and minds. They were able to speak their truth. They were able to inspire us. And we still look to people from the past to inform our present and to lead us and encourage us and challenge us into the future. Last Sunday, we talked about the light, this little light of mine, how it has been passed to us and that we are intended to let it shine, not to hide it under a bushel, not to let anyone blow it out, but to carry it from someone else to us and out into the future. The other day, when I was in Nashville, I saw a banner, a mural, John Lewis on there, and I remember him talking about good trouble, and I hope that I get in it over and over again. Good trouble that will continue down. There's a through line with the people from the past that we admire, that we feel inspired by, that we can embody and embrace some of the things that they said and did for our new day. So our context may be different, but the through line and the continuity and the intentionality is the same. And so Transfiguration Sunday, and if you're like me, you keep kind of looking up at that every once in a while and seeing that dazzling robe that Jesus has on. It's kind of white, kind of blue, kind of bright. And when he was up on the mountain that day of the Transfiguration with the disciples, they were blinded by it. And so they couldn't see at all. And then suddenly they were able to see, and they noticed that it was not Jesus standing there alone, but he was with Moses and Elijah. They did not inhabit the same time and the same space, but in that moment of the Spirit, they were able to see Moses and Elijah and Jesus, and they had to imagine what it was that they were talking about. Maybe they spent a lot of time in silence, just looking into each other's eyes, just being rooted and grounded in that moment where they had that gift of being with each other, of inhabiting that space, of allowing the Spirit to move them. And we wonder, why were those characters chosen? Of all the ones who had been in the story of God through the history of the people in the scriptures, why Moses? Why Elijah? It was because Moses represented the law when God gave the commandments, and Elijah represented the prophets. Like, how do you live into the law? How do you live into God's love? And how do you speak about it? How are you prophetic about it? How do you move it forward, even when there seem to be roadblocks, even when there be people who don't seem to want to hear it, who have no interest or desire to be a part of what it is that God is trying to do, what it is that God has been trying to do all along, down through history, through this moment, and into the future. And so we look for these through lines because God has been doing the same thing all along, trying to help us not to be afraid, trying to help us to listen, trying to help us to love, trying to help us to get outside of ourselves and to belong to each other, inviting us to be in community and be compassionate, to be kind, like Thaddeus said, to be caring and sharing, like Wyatt told us, to open ourselves up to each other. God has been inviting us to do that down through time and will not stop inviting us to do that because it is necessary and good, and it is what will help us to move forward, to have a future to speak of. So I want to lift up for just a couple of minutes some of the things that Moses and Elijah had, that you can see the through lines. You can see how Jesus received those gifts and those directions from them and then passed them along to the disciples, and then they were passed along to us. So we continue to need that inspiration and encouragement and grounding from Moses and from Elijah and certainly from Jesus and the disciples as we attempt to live our lives forward, carrying that light, being that light for ourselves and for each other. And so the story of Moses and the Israelites was all about freedom from oppression, that they were trying to get out of slavery in Egypt. They had a difficult time doing that, but God heard their cries, heard their voice, and helped to set them free. Jesus was always trying to set people free. He proclaimed release to the captives. He proclaimed good news to the poor and freedom from the systems that bound people. And so we see that through line of liberation, setting the oppressed people free. And so we are invited to continue that along. Some of you will be joining others from our interfaith community around St. Louis tomorrow on the MLK Bridge, because you've heard the call to continue that journey of liberation and of setting people free, of walking with people, of reminding them that we are not meant to be in cages or captives, but we are meant to be free, to have space to belong to each other, to share what we have, to open up our hearts and our minds, and to be more and more available to each other. So for Moses and for Elijah, they spent time on mountaintops, but they couldn't stay there. And then the disciples spent time on the mountaintop with Jesus, and one of the disciples said, "Wait, I'll build some booths, I'll build some tents so that we can stay here longer." But Jesus said no, because when you have these high, holy moments, when you finally figure things out, when you are reminded and refreshed in what you need to be about, you can't stay in that place, but you have to go to where those gifts and things are needed. And so I remember when I was in middle school, high school, at our UCC summer camp, where we talked a lot about how all year long we waited for camp so that we could have some freedom from the people that were usually our captors back at home, and so that we could belong to each other. And they were high and holy moments, lots of freedom, lots of space, lots of discovery, lots of conversations. But the counselors always told us, now you have to go back. You have to go back to your life. You have to go back to the world, and you have to bring this experience with you and remember what's possible, and remember the tastes of the things that you want, and that you are called to have other people experience those things too. You can't just stay here on the mountaintop. You can't stay here in this experience, but you can carry it with you, and you can try to find ways to help others to find that experience too. In the scriptures, we hear about Moses, how he had a mixed multitude of people when they eventually left Egypt. They weren't there for a short period of time, and we imagine that as they were there, some non-Israelites joined his group, and some people married into the family. And others who were swept up in this idea of liberation came to him. And so by the time they left Egypt, Moses had a mixed multitude of people with him. The through line is that Jesus was always gathering people who were different. He was always welcoming people who others said, they don't fit, they don't belong. No thank you, step aside. Jesus was always trying to gather different kinds of people, a mixed multitude. And so we are invited with this through line to remember that it's always been the way of God to gather people together, to celebrate diversity, equity, and inclusion. Maybe you've heard of DEI before. And then we flip a little bit to Elijah. Elijah also trying to help the story of God, the wisdom and love and grace of God, the fruitfulness of God to move forward. He had incredible courage, Elijah, because he had to speak truth to power. Jesus learned how to speak truth to power. He told the people who were there making the decisions that they were forgetting about all of the people, and that they were self-serving more often than not. And so they were encouraged by Jesus, and we are encouraged by him and Elijah to speak truth to power. We write letters, we make phone calls, we have conversations with each other to say things could and should be different. One of my favorite stories from Scripture is about Elijah. He's with a woman who has 2 sons, and they have nothing. Her husband has died, and they have nothing but a little bit of oil left in one jar, and she doesn't know what's going to become of her and her children. And so Elijah the prophet tells them to go and borrow some vessels, some empty vessels from the neighbors, and bring them back and pour into those empty vessels from that little bit of oil that they have. And it flows and it flows and it flows and it fills all of the vessels until they have more than enough. Jesus multiplied loaves and fish. Jesus always had more to say, more to share, more to give. And the through line is about abundance. not to be afraid of scarcity, not to imagine that we have to hold on and hoard the things that we have, but instead to be generous and gracious and find ways to multiply the things that we have been given. There are lots more things that we could say about Moses and what he stood for and what he did, the kind of courage he had and the insight that he had, some of the mistakes that he made, some of the ways that he didn't feel like he measured up, that he was enough. And stories about Elijah, who had incredible power, was able to be a prophet, but also was afraid. And he ran, not much unlike Don, running away and trying to find rest, and maybe even was about to give up. But we are called, we are invited to move forward, to remember, just like those in the past, that we have a job to do, and that we're not called to do it alone, but nonetheless we're called to engage in this work. Our closing hymn that we'll sing in a little bit is called "In the Midst of New Dimensions." It was written in 1985, mid-80s, 1990, a while ago, but there are still things that we pull from those times and places to encourage us, to remind us of what is good and what is right and what is true. "In the Midst of New Dimensions" was written by Julian Rush, who was a United Methodist pastor, had served in the church for about 17 years before he came out as a gay person. The church disowned him, pushed him out, stopped allowing him to minister among them. He eventually found a place to serve, and because he wanted to stay positive, because he wanted to stay affirming, because he still loved the church and its possibilities, he wrote this hymn, "In the Midst of New Dimensions." What it does is invite us to think about how the through line is still there, that all of the things that God has asked us to do, God continues to ask us to do, but maybe it's in new dimensions, maybe it's in new packaging, maybe it's in new ways, maybe it's with different partners, maybe it's with this mixed multitude, maybe it's being firmly rooted and grounded in the past, but being open and available and vulnerable to what's happening right now. So think about that when we get to that hymn at the end. You notice that we have a pride flag up here this morning. It's because the pride flag at Stonewall was removed, the national monument there this week. And so we are saying no. We are speaking our truth to power about mixed multitudes and about what we can say and do, how all along the Holy has been preparing us to speak love, to open our minds, to open our hearts, to do what we can do to move forward the Holy's agenda of love. Please pray with us. Holy One, this is a difficult time to be the church. But when we think about it, every time has been a difficult time to be the church, because we say the world should be different, and we challenge people, and we invite people to faithfulness. We invite people to open up, to be vulnerable, to share what they have been given. We invite people to be wrong and to be honest and to be forgiving and gracious. And so help us in this moment, our moment, to know that we're not doing it alone, and that you have given us examples and inspirations of people in the past, and that we are examples and inspirations and encouragement for the people around us and for the people yet to be. And so help us feel the through line of your love and of your grace, to know on mountaintops and in valleys that you are with us, and that you have work for us to do, and you have rest where we can refresh, because we have to get to this work, and we have to do it together, and we have to find ways to love beyond measure. Holy One, be in our ruminations, be in our planning, be with us as we chart courses and set on the path to love. Amen.